Welcome to POTUS 2017, where we keep watch on the Oval Office and pour cold hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Today we examine President Trump's more conventional but still highly nationalist address to a joint session of Congress. We'll address the many questions raised by the speech. For example, why, as Trump lamented the trillions spent on war that could have rebuilt our infrastructure many times over, he said, did we also hear this?
I am sending Congress a budget that rebuilds the military, eliminates the defense sequester, and calls for one of the largest increases in national defense spending in American history.
Other questions. In a speech casting fearful visions of undocumented criminals in our midst, came a proposal for a merit-based immigration policy. What would such a policy mean to the huddled masses yearning to breathe free? And did the speech reflect some increased GOP unity on taxes and health care? And did we see something quite new, a recognition by Trump that reaching across the aisle might be necessary?
Everything that is broken in our country can be fixed. Every problem can be solved. And every hurting family can find healing and hope. Our citizens deserve this, and so much more. So why not join forces and finally get the job done and get it done right?
Joining us via Skype from Washington, Norman Ornstein, a resident scholar at the Conservative American Enterprise Institute and co-author of It's Even Worse Than It Looks, How the American Constitutional System Collided with the New Politics of Extremism. And here in our studio, another political scientist, Professor Christina Greer of Fordham University, author of Black Ethnics, Immigration, and the Pursuit of the American Dream. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Brian.
Great to be with you.
Christina, this was, for all the media talk about kinder and gentler, Donald Trump's Steve Bannon nationalist speech, nationalist at its core, wasn't it?
I thought it was an incredibly dangerous white supremacist speech. And so I followed along with the transcript, and I think so many people are getting distracted by the tone of the speech, in the sense that the president did not deviate too much from the script, and he wasn't erratic, and he wasn't angry, and it was a change from his inauguration speech, which was very volatile and disorganized in a lot of ways. This, though, when you look at the details of the speech, it's a white nationalist speech. I'm president of America. I really don't care about the world. I want to increase defense spending. I want to create this agency called Voice, where I'm deporting essentially people of color, immigrants. You know, I want to make it such that it's a merit-based system so that only a certain type of immigrant can come in. He can only talk about African Americans and Latinos when he links them to violence and poverty and the inner cities and poor education and lack of education. And so I really am so worried that so many Democrats and Republicans and pundits were only hearing the tone and not the white nationalism that I wouldn't even say was an undertone, was an overtone of the speech, and a clear vision of how he wants to, you know, decrease funding for the FDA, put a hiring freeze for all non-essential government employees, all the things that we rely on to sort of make this a democratic, small d democratic nation. He's getting rid of for the sake of kind of this boogeyman and the fear of these violent, illegal immigrants who are coming here and killing people, which statistically is just not true.
You mentioned that Voice, quote unquote, program and illegal immigrants killing people. We have that clip. I want to play that clip right now, and then Norm Ornstein will bring you right in on that. This is what President Trump said about a new office that they're going to open in the White House, along with a relevant database.
And we must support the victims of crime. I have ordered the Department of Homeland Security to create an office to serve American victims. The office is called Voice, Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement. We are providing a voice to those who have been ignored by our media and silenced by special interests. Joining us.
Norm Ornstein, you've been around Washington for a long time. Have you ever heard anything like that?
No, I've never heard anything like that. And first, a general comment, Brian, to follow on. Ever since Donald Trump got into this campaign, there has been a consistent media theme. Is he pivoting? Now he's pivoting. Oh, he's becoming a normal candidate, and he never pivoted. Now he's become our elected president. He'll pivot to become just like the other presidents, and he never pivoted. After the inauguration, he didn't pivot. Now, because he speaks in a regular tone of voice and has a mild way of going about it and could read from a teleprompter for an hour, we had a punditry class that basically gushed all over him. If you listen to the speech, as Christina said, it was a Bannon-Miller speech. But getting to the point about the Voice program, just today, and maybe yesterday, Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, announced that he was going to stop the federal government having any kind of a role overseeing and moderating police departments that have gone out of control, like Chicago and Cleveland and Ferguson. So what we see here is an attempt to focus on the teeny tiny fraction of immigrants who've committed violent crimes by creating a White House office, while you step back from all of the other kinds of crimes that have taken place. And it's really a signal that the bombastic populist rhetoric that Donald Trump had during the campaign is the same bombastic populist set of policies that are being followed, whether he does it in a gentler tone of voice or not.
Mm-hmm. I agree 1,000%. I mean, we can look at the types of people that he's nominated for his cabinet, but I think Sessions is a prime example. I mean, every time, keep in mind, this president makes a decision, David Duke tweets about how happy he is that the mission is being completed, right? I mean, this is something where Stephen Bannon has such an agenda for this country, and we know that Donald Trump has no executive experience. We know that he goes off the rails, and so we have Pence creating the international face of diplomacy, and he has a clear agenda on his own. But back home, we see, Donald Trump has these different factions that are creating different types of policy. He's not using his united government the way he could or should just yet, but the little things that he has been able to get done, even the symbolic things, but other minor things. I mean, this Jeff Sessions mandate should not be taken lightly. This is a 50-state strategy. This affects poor people. This affects people of color. And they have long-standing effects. And so just because one speech after 40 days was delivered without him essentially looking like a lunatic, so many people are just proud and ready to just follow suit. But the policies have not changed, not one bit.
Tell me more, because a lot of our viewers probably don't know about it. More about this Jeff Sessions mandate. When you talk about the police, people probably know, like in Ferguson, for example, the individual officer was acquitted, but the Justice Department investigation found a more systemic problem with the way the department went about its business.
And so when you have people like Eric Holder and then Loretta Lynch realizing that police departments across the country had historical, systemic, institutional, either racism, bias, or just egregious acts that were happening within the entire police department. Every now and again, they got highlighted by a particular incident and a particular officer, but it warranted further investigation into the entire system, sort of looking at the top level all the way down. And so all these investigations were going on in very select places around the country. Now that Jeff Sessions is Loretta Lynch's replacement, he's essentially dropped a lot of those cases. The same way he's dropped the case in Texas, where the DOJ was pressing to make sure that there was equity when it came to the Voting Rights Act, right? The DOJ was actually the one that was saying, let's keep this in court. There's something going on, and it's racially biased against African Americans.
Federal government just switched sides.
And they're just
like,
you know what, we actually don't think that there's anything
case.
going on, so we're just going to leave the case alone. So these are things that, we had one Department of Justice that was working really hard to actually get to the bottom of some of this race and class injustice that we've seen in either in the court system or the police departments. And now we have a justice system that's just essentially saying, there's nothing to see here, go on home.
Norm Ornstein, on an even broader philosophical level, Steve Bannon at the Conservative Political Action Conference last week was very explicit in his talk that he wants to change politics in this country from a left versus right paradigm to a nationalist versus globalist paradigm, with his side obviously being the nationalists. Do you see that as having meaning? And again, with your experience, do you recognize this?
Oh, certainly recognize it. And what we saw, of course, in the election was a very substantial gulf between the coasts, the cosmopolitan nature of America, including the big cities and people who reside in and right around them, and the heartland, and especially people who live in small towns or in rural areas or in smaller cities. And that's something Bannon is trying to exploit. He believes that he can create a new governing coalition. But central to that is doing some things that the Republican Party isn't going to like very much. And the one part of the speech that Trump gave last night that is a Bannon favorite, but that didn't get much reaction from that side of the aisle, but got a more enthusiastic one from the Democratic side, was the massive infrastructure program, which he believes can bring a lot of jobs to working class people. One thing that's important to note is that the nationalist approach that he's taking, which includes that line that we were talking about earlier of Trump, I'm going to take care of the United States, not the rest of the world, is something that is a Bannon signature. And the speech last night had some pundits saying, well, he must be moving away from that Bannon, Miller, in-your-face kind of approach. But of course, Bannon and Miller wrote this speech and very carefully crafted it to try and change the tone without changing the substance. And now we're going to see some very interesting clashes when we move from speeches to action, to policies going to Congress, and whether, for example, the idea that you're going to vastly increase defense but dramatically cut the budget for foreign aid in the State Department will pass muster with the John McCains and Lindsey Grahams and Marco Rubios of the world, much less many of the other Republicans in Congress.
Norm Ornstein, thank you very much. And Christina Greer, to follow up on Norm's thought about Bannon's big government side. And when we look at nationalist politicians around the world, they are, ethnically exclusive, but they are also big government. So
Right.
Le Pen in France, for example, is for preserving France's big social welfare programs and unemployment and high taxes, but not allowing a lot of Muslims in.
Right.
Now, in the case of the United States, I'm not sure that that other shoe is really going to drop for big government. And I want to play another clip from the speech with it that might show that Trump, in order for the ethnic and religious nationalist parts to go forward, might make some deals with the Republican Congress to actually pursue a small government agenda on the domestic side. So here's what Donald Trump said, and this is a change from before, on Obamacare reform.
First, we should ensure that Americans with pre-existing conditions have access to coverage and that we have a stable transition for Americans currently enrolled in the health care exchanges. Secondly, we should help Americans purchase their own coverage through the use of tax credits and expanded health savings accounts. But it must be the plan they want, not the plan forced on them by our government.
So it was really the beginning of that I was keying on when he said people with pre-existing conditions should have access
Right.
to care. That's not the same as saying they can't be denied by insurance companies. They can have access if they pay the extra freight.
Right, exactly. It's like, well, I have access to the moon, but I didn't become an engineer and go through NASA, right? I mean, the devil is always in the details with him. And so I think the healthcare piece will be the huge frontier. I mean, I think infrastructure spending, well, this is a man who's been bankrupt 8 times. So we know that he doesn't fully understand money and how it fundamentally works, and you can't run the government the way you run a business. But when it comes to healthcare, there are way too many Republicans who have way too many of their constituents who have been on Obamacare for 7 years or close to it. And so you can't just rip it out from underneath him. So how he's going to deal with the factions within his party and across the sort of 38 states with Republican control will be a very complicated issue for him.
All right. Also joining us now via Skype from Washington, Gordon Adams, co-editor of Mission Creep, The Militarization of U.S. Foreign Policy, and emeritus professor at American University's School of International Service. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Is it part of the nationalist program of Trump and Bannon and Stephen Miller to include a military buildup? Can you see it in that context?
Yes, I think so, although I would have to say I think it is largely symbolic. We don't have a lot of detail on what this plus $54 billion is going to look like. But we do know that the president has said he wants the biggest, baddest, toughest force in the world to buy us, borrowing from Ronald Reagan, peace through strength. So we're really looking at something that is more symbolic than it is programmatic. It says we'll have more, and he's taken numbers largely from the Heritage Foundation during the campaign. More will buy more ships. It'll increase the size of the Army. It'll increase the size of the Marine Corps. But at the same time, he said, we're not going to do any more nation building, which means the large force that we were shrinking because we weren't doing any more nation building in Iraq and Afghanistan now becomes the force you could do nation building with. So it's not entirely clear that the strategy matches the budget numbers.
Yeah, and one of the columns in the New York Times today called it military preening, just like, look at the size of my military. Does it make sense to you where he's going? Because there seems to be a contradiction, even in this one speech, when he talks about all the money we could have spent domestically if we didn't spend it all in the Middle East. But then he talks about going more aggressively than Obama after ISIS and proposes this military buildup. So is he proposing a more interventionist or more isolationist military policy?
The rhetoric is America first. The rhetoric is pull back from heavy military engagement overseas. And Trump has said this in the past. He's basically said, we got ourselves involved in things we shouldn't have been involved in. We didn't make any difference. And we shouldn't be engaging in those kinds of exercises, largely like Iraq, which he says he opposed, and one presumes Afghanistan. So symbolically, he's saying American first. What he's building and buying with this money is a capability to actually do a lot of intervention if he wanted to.
So they'll figure out what that might be. But at the same time, the budget that the president unveiled this week, preliminary, early draft, very broad outlines, has this 10% or $54 billion buildup in the military, but cuts in everything else to pay for it,
Right.
because he's also cutting taxes, which cuts revenue.
Right, and I think he's also assuming, though, that many of the people in the military will be his supporters, right? And so they will make sure it's like creating a jobs program through the military for particular people that will then say, well, now I have, sort of security. I mean, what really worries me also, though, is when you start buying all of these toys, and we know that Donald Trump likes to collect big, fancy, shiny things, some of the other weapons that are less relevant will then go to police departments across the country. Also, though, if you have a fleet of ships and tanks and guns and people, you're carrying around a big hammer and everything seems to start to look like a nail. And we know that this particular individual, we've already had one failed intervention where unfortunately we lost a U.S. soldier, to say nothing of the 30 some odd people that were killed in Yemen. So he is not understanding what intervention looks like already, right? He has no military background. He's got no electoral politics background. So this is just fun for him. He doesn't really understand the weight of the U.S. military and these types of interventions.
Professor Adams, I want to get your take on the number of generals around Donald Trump. I think you've used a term called velvet militarization, which maybe you could describe. But funny enough, it looks to the untrained observer that the generals around him, like McMaster and Mattis, are sort of the level-headed, pragmatic ones, and the civilians like Miller and Bannon are the ideological, more wild-eyed ones.
It's a rather hefty looking contradiction. In a sense, in terms of civil military relations in the United States, it looks odd that we are relying for level headedness on military officers in some of these key positions. There's very little precedent for having the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Advisor all be retired uniforms. I call it velvet militarization because it's not really a case of, this is not a military coup. This is not a sudden seizure of power by the military the way you'd see it in some other country, and it does happen. It's way against the American tradition to do that. It's velvet because it becomes a factor in the decision making in the White House, both about how they approach international problems and about the instruments that get used when foreign policy is made. Right? The approach to international problems is to say, it is the issue that the previous person said, which is what you have is a hammer, everything around you looks like a nail. It's more serious than that. It's because within the National Security Council, the perspective is one of the application of military force. That's the tool they know. It's the capability they have. And it certainly impresses Donald Trump, who, as the speaker said, knows nothing about military, little else about governing. So that's the big first problem. The second problem is that these people become the instrument that gets used, right? So when a decision is made to go do something, increasingly we use the military instrument to do it, and we've done that over the past 15 years. We use it repeatedly, excessively, and as we do it, we basically are saying our civilian instruments can't do this broader range of missions. Developing countries, constructing power grids, governing countries, missions that don't normally belong to the military. So we see an expansion of the military role, an assumption the civilian agencies can't do it.
Professor, the military people, maybe in a slightly more generous view, don't only see everything as a nail if their only tool is a hammer and the tool is the military, so everything is war. I mean, they don't want to get their people killed. And there is a lot of restraint that I've experienced in speaking to generals over the years about when to actually advocate for war rather than just know how to wage war if they get to that point. Is that your experience?
Yes, that is. I spent 5 years in the Clinton White House and sat in a lot of Situation Room meetings. And indeed, if you sit in those meetings, it was interesting to watch. Sometimes the Secretary of Defense, but often the military officer representing the Joint Chiefs of Staff would be the most cautious about the use of military force. I think it's somewhat more subtle than that. It's that generals really aren't diplomats. So if what you want to do is develop an integrated strategy for a problem, say Syria, for example, and what you have in the discussion is generals, then the limits on what they might conceive of as an appropriate strategy is very real.
Right.
You need somebody from the civilian side, the State Department, USAID, and places like that, even on the NSC staff, who are civilians, who say, here's the way we see this exercise in the framework of a broader strategy to solve the problem.
And
so it constrains the options.
In the budget draft is this military buildup and also a substantial cut to the budget of the State Department. How do you read
Correct.
that?
I'll tell you, I'm a budget technician under one hat, and I can tell you that the reason that probably happened was not so much an obdurate anxiety about the inability of the State Department and AID to do their jobs, but in the budget process, defense budgets are dealt with under one budget cap under the 2011 Budget Control Act.
Wow.
And the State Department is thrown in non-defense discretionary, which is what they use to pay for the defense budget cap. And when you do that, the least well-defended programs in the budget process are foreign assistance and diplomacy. Nobody particularly likes them.
Interesting. Christina Greer, there was a little drama before the speech that people who are watching a lot of cable television on Tuesday afternoon may have been aware of. Donald Trump himself leaked to some network television people that maybe I'm going to consider comprehensive immigration reform after all, and not just be into deportation and limit the number of legal immigrants. But, status for the DACA recipients, the Dreamers, and even status, but short of citizenship, for older undocumented immigrants. Then when he got to the speech, he didn't deliver it. And that was after hours of speculation on all the cable channels that, this is going to be a little revolution in this speech before Congress, because suddenly he's going to be Nixon going to China on immigration.
Right.
And then it didn't happen.
Donald Trump did not have his hands all over that speech. That was a Bannon Miller speech. And so he likes the suspense. Keep in mind, during the campaign, he consistently told us, when we asked specific questions, he said, you'll have to wait and see. Wink, wink, right? And so immigration and healthcare are clearly going to be the two juggernauts of his particular administration. But we do know, and I mean, if we're being somewhat hopeful, and there's very little hope that was in that speech last night, but if we're being somewhat hopeful, we can see maybe this particular president is more concerned about ratings and people liking him and the adulation he received. You saw him basking in that applause. He may actually work very hard to try and work across the aisle in some capacity. Maybe. Right?
But in terms of pure political analysis, the other way to look at it is his 45% or so base is very enthusiastic.
And he has to deliver. Well, I mean, that's what the executive orders were all about, delivering the red meat to the individuals that actually voted for you. Now, granted, there's not a lot of meat behind it, but symbolically, he made them very happy.
Professor Adams, very quickly, one last question. I see you've recommended that your defense and foreign policy colleagues try to make some common cause with organizations working in things like climate change and low-income programs and educational reform and union organizing. How do those things connect, and can they really form some meaningful political coalition that makes sense to influence Donald Trump?
One of the things that I think has happened to the Democratic Party, and we saw it in the last election, was that we fractionated the constituency of the Democratic Party into a bunch of specific issue view groups, if you will. Constituents have a particular kind of interest, but have never particularly been brought together in recent years as a cohesive political force. What happened in that instance was that the message about economic justice got lost. And the whole appeal of the Democratic Party to economic equality and jobs tended to get lost in a cacophony of organizational demands around nuclear weapons or environmental climate change issues. Particular constituencies of the party put themselves forward, but there was not an overarching strategy of how to appeal to the American people at a gut level. What I'm saying there basically is it is very important now for those constituencies to find ways to blend their issues. And one of them, clearly given this budget, is the budgetary trade-offs. Trump basically made the case. We're going up in defense. We're going down in everything else.
Professor Greer, Professor Adams, thank you both very much.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
And that's our program for today. We're here each week at this hour, keeping watch on the Oval Office and pouring cold hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. Next time, a half-hour special on Israel and Palestine. It's a glimpse of the just concluded J Street Conference in Washington, D.C., where both sides actually listen and talk peace. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.